Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The email pinged on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn spreadsheet. Coffee? The subject line read, and the sender was Mr. Harrison. James Harrison, the CEO of Harrison & Co., the man who, in my 10 years as his executive assistant, had never once suggested anything more personal than a working lunch, and even those were rare, usually involving a client. My eyebrows shot up. This was new. James was a creature of habit, a man whose schedule I knew better than my own. Coffee, impromptu on a Tuesday, unheard of. I clicked it open. Sarah, it began, which was already a slight deviation from his usual Ms. Albright in written communication unless we were in a direct, ongoing conversation. Would you be free to step out for a coffee sometime this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss, something a bit more informal than the office allows. Let me know. James. A swirl of possibilities, most of them tinged with a faint anxiety, began to churn in my mind. Was I being let go? No, that didn't seem right. My last review had been glowing. A promotion? Perhaps, but that was usually a more formal affair, a scheduled meeting in his office, not a casual coffee. Maybe it was about the Henderson account, the one that had been causing him visible stress for weeks. But why the secrecy, the need to leave the office? I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Albright. 47, been with Harrison & Co. since I was 37, single and pretty content with my quiet life, my cat, Mittens, and my small garden. James Harrison was, well, an enigma. Around 60, I guessed, though he had the energy of a much younger man. Always impeccably dressed, a quiet authority about him that commanded respect without him ever needing to raise his voice. He was reserved, intensely private, and I'd always respected that boundary. Our relationship was professional, efficient, built on years of mutual reliance in a work context. I knew his coffee order by heart. Black, 2 sugars. The way he liked his reports collated, and the exact moment his patience was wearing thin, usually indicated by a subtle tapping of his pen. But the man himself? A closed book. I typed back, "Yes, Mr. Harrison, that would be fine. I'm flexible this afternoon. Just let me know when suits you." His reply was almost instantaneous. "How about 3 p.m.? There's a little place on Elm Street, the Daily Grind. We can walk over." The Daily Grind. Not the sterile corporate cafe downstairs, or the upscale bistro he sometimes used for client meetings. This was a small, independent coffee shop, known for its mismatched furniture and the aroma of freshly baked pastries that always seemed to hang in the air around it. An interesting choice. It felt deliberate. The minutes leading up to 3 p.m. crawled by. I found myself reapplying lipstick, smoothing down my already neat blouse, a strange flutter in my stomach. It was just coffee, I told myself. But my intuition, honed by years of observing the subtle undercurrents of office life, insisted it was more. At precisely 2:58 p.m., James appeared at my office door, which was ajar. He rarely came to my desk. Usually, it was a summons via intercom or email. "Ready, Sarah?" he asked, a small, almost hesitant smile on his face. It was a different kind of smile than his usual polite, professional one. This one reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look less like the formidable CEO and more like, well, just a man. "Yes, Mr. Harrison. All set." I grabbed my purse, my mind still racing. The walk over was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons where the sun felt warm on your skin, but the air had a definite chill, and the leaves were just beginning to turn those glorious shades of red and gold. Elm Street was bustling, the usual mix of shoppers and people on their afternoon breaks. I found myself noticing small details, the way James nodded at an elderly gentleman struggling with a newspaper, the brief moment he paused to look at a display of handcrafted pottery in a shop window. These were glimpses of a James Harrison I didn't know. The daily grind was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the sleek modern lines of our office building. The smell of coffee and cinnamon was enveloping. Soft jazz played in the background. It was busy, but not overcrowded. We found a small table in a quieter corner, near a window looking out onto a little courtyard garden. "What can I get for you, Sarah?" James asked, already shrugging off his jacket. "A latte would be lovely. Thank you, Mr. Harrison." He went to the counter to order, and I watched him. It was strange seeing him in this environment, so out of his usual corporate element. He interacted easily with the young barista, a genuine smile on his face as he paid. He returned with our drinks, placing my latte carefully in front of me and his own black coffee beside it. No sugar. Interesting. Had he stopped taking sugar, or was my intel outdated? It was a trivial thought, yet it underscored how little I truly knew about him outside our defined roles. He settled into his chair, cradling his mug. The silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the gentle hum of the coffee shop. Then he looked at me, his gaze direct, serious, but also vulnerable. That was a new one. "Sarah," he began, his voice a little lower than usual. "Thank you for coming. I appreciate you making the time." "Of course, Mr. Harrison." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "I asked you here because I value your discretion, your judgment. We've worked together for a long time now." I nodded, waiting. The subtle tension I'd felt earlier was now a palpable hum in the air between us. "What I'm about to tell you," he continued, his eyes searching mine, "is deeply personal. It's not something I share lightly. In fact, I haven't shared it with anyone at the company, or indeed, with many people at all." My heart gave a little thump. This was definitely not about the Henderson account. I leaned in slightly, trying to convey attentiveness, reassurance. "Mr. Harrison, whatever it is, you have my word. I'm a good listener." He managed another small smile, though this one seemed tinged with melancholy. "I know you are, Sarah. That's one of the many reasons I've always valued you." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if steeling himself. The aroma of roasted beans and warm milk seemed to intensify, the quiet chatter around us fading into a distant murmur. The world narrowed to just this small table, this unexpected conversation, and the weight of the impending revelation. "The thing is, Sarah," he said, his gaze unwavering, "my life isn't quite what it appears to be from the outside. There's a part of me, a very significant part, that I've kept hidden for a very, very long time." He hesitated, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or maybe just the raw exposure of bearing a long-held secret. I'm not the man everyone thinks I am." The air crackled. My latte sat untouched, its delicate foam art slowly dissolving. I held his gaze, my mind a blank slate, waiting. What could possibly make the powerful, composed James Harrison look so fragile? The anticipation was almost suffocating, a tightening in my chest. He looked down at his coffee cup, tracing the rim with his finger, the picture of a man wrestling with words that were clearly difficult to voice. The bustling cafe around us seemed to melt away, and it was just the two of us, suspended in this bubble of impending disclosure. He looked up again, his blue eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, now clouded with a depth of emotion I'd never witnessed in him. For many years, Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying an immense weight, I've known that my identity, my true self, is not male. I am a woman, Sarah. That is the truth I've carried, largely alone, for most of my life. The words hung in the air, delicate yet powerful, like glass chimes in a sudden breeze. A woman. Mr. Harrison, my boss, the pillar of corporate strength, was telling me he was a woman. My mind struggled to reconcile the image I had of him. The tailored suits, the deep voice, the confident male presence, with this new, startling piece of information. It wasn't a negative reaction, not at all, more like my internal compass spinning wildly, trying to find a new north. I saw the anxiety in his eyes, the plea for understanding, and something within me, a deep well of empathy, I suppose, just opened up. I didn't speak immediately. I simply held his gaze, letting the information settle. The sounds of the cafe slowly seeped back in, the clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. But everything felt different now, sharper, imbued with a new significance. He was waiting, I knew, for my reaction, probably bracing himself for anything from disbelief to discomfort. Finally, I found my voice. It came out softer than I intended. "Thank you for telling me, James," I said, consciously using his first name, feeling it was somehow more appropriate now, a small gesture of acknowledgement. That must have taken a great deal of courage to share. A visible wave of relief washed over his features. His shoulders, which I hadn't realized were so tense, seemed to drop an inch. The fear in his eyes receded, replaced by a glimmer of something akin to gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that, to not see." "Well, to not see judgment." "There's no judgment here, James," I assured him, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Only respect for your honesty." He let out a shaky breath and reached for his coffee cup again, his hand not quite steady. I'm still in the process of figuring everything out. How to navigate this. It's daunting. I'm planning to transition, to live authentically as the woman I am. Her name is Julia? Julia. A name. A new name for a person I thought I knew, yet was only just beginning to understand. Felt right. It felt softer, somehow, fitting the vulnerability she, was showing me. Julia, I repeated softly, trying the name out. It's a beautiful name. A genuine smile, brighter this time, touched her lips. Thank you. My mother loved that name. She paused, then continued. The reason I wanted to tell you, Sarah, apart from the fact that I trust you implicitly, is that this will eventually mean changes at work. Significant changes. And I'll need support, understanding. And practically speaking, I'll need your help, if you're willing, to navigate how this is communicated, how things will shift. The weight of her request settled on me. This wasn't just a personal revelation. It was the prelude to a profound transformation that would ripple through the entire company. And she was asking me, Sarah Albright, her executive assistant, to be a part of that journey, a confidant, an ally. It was a huge ask, a monumental responsibility, but even as the implications began to dawn on me, I felt a surprising sense of calm, and more than that, a sense of honor that she had chosen to trust me with something so fundamental to her being. I understand, I said slowly, my mind already starting to wear with the practicalities, but also deeply moved by the trust she was placing in me. And yes, Julia, I'm willing to help in any way I can. You have my full support. The relief on her face was profound. It was as if a great burden had been lifted, or at least shared. I don't know what I expected, Sarah, but your reaction. It's more than I could have hoped for. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. There will be a lot to consider. The board, the staff, clients. It's a minefield. But knowing I have at least one person in my corner, someone I've worked with for so long, who knows the company inside and out, it makes a world of difference. We sat in silence for a few moments, the unspoken emotions filling the space between us. The latte had long since gone cool, but I barely noticed. The warmth I felt came from a different source now, a connection forged in a moment of raw honesty and vulnerability. It was a strange feeling. The man I knew as Mr. Harrison, the CEO, was still there, but overlaid with this new understanding, this new person, Julia. And in that moment, I felt a deeper respect for her than I ever had before. It wasn't just about her position or her business acumen anymore. It was about her courage, her authenticity. When, I asked gently, when were you thinking of? Of making this more public? Julia sighed, a thoughtful expression on her face. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I've been working with a therapist, a gender specialist, for some time now. And I've started hormone therapy. Legally, I'm still James, but Julia is emerging. I think, perhaps in the next 6 months to a year. I want to do it right, with as little disruption and as much dignity as possible for everyone involved, but especially for myself. 6 months to a year. It seemed like a long time, yet also incredibly short for such a monumental change. That sounds like a thoughtful approach, I said. We can work on a plan, a communication strategy. I can help research policies, ensure we're prepared for questions, for any reactions. Thank you, Sarah. Your pragmatism is exactly what I need right now, alongside your understanding. She hesitated. There's more, of course. About my personal life, how this affects my family, or what's left of it. My wife passed away some years ago, as you know. My children are grown, and, well, that's another set of conversations I'm navigating. But that's for another time, perhaps. For today, I just needed to tell someone who might understand, or at least listen without prejudice. I nodded. The weight of her journey was immense, far beyond just the workplace. Whenever you want to talk, Julia, about any of it, I'm here. It felt natural to say it, natural to offer that support. The professional boundaries had shifted irrevocably, and in their place was something far more human, more profound. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Julia spoke a little about her feelings, the decades of suppression, the slow dawning of understanding about her own identity, the fear, and now the quiet determination. She didn't go into exhaustive detail, but she shared enough for me to grasp the enormity of her internal struggle and the bravery of her decision. I listened, mostly, occasionally asking a gentle question, offering quiet words of affirmation. I learned that Julia had always felt this way, a persistent, quiet knowing that her external presentation didn't match her internal reality. She spoke of the loneliness of it, the feeling of being an actor in her own life. As she spoke, I found myself looking at her differently. The sharp, somewhat severe lines of Mr. Harrison's face seemed softer now. The guardedness I'd always sensed in him was still there, but it was overlaid with a new openness, a vulnerability that was incredibly endearing. I saw the courage it took to sit here, in a public coffee shop, and lay bare such a fundamental truth to an employee. You know, Sarah, Julia said, a wry smile playing on her lips. For years, I'd prided myself on being a rational, logical businessman. Emotions were liabilities. And yet, here I am, probably the most emotional I've ever been in a professional context. Authenticity isn't a liability, Julia, I replied. And sharing something so important isn't a weakness. It's a strength. She looked at me, her eyes shining. You've given me a great gift today, Sarah. The gift of acceptance. I won't forget it. As we prepared to leave, a sense of quiet camaraderie had settled between us. The initial shock had given way to a feeling of deep respect and a surprising sense of excitement. Not for the drama, but for the journey of transformation I was being invited to witness and support. Walking back to the office, the autumn air felt even crisper, the colors of the leaves more vibrant. The world seemed a little different, a little brighter, because a truth had been spoken and a connection had been made. Back in the familiar sterility of the office building, the usual sounds of keyboards clicking and phones ringing seemed mundane, almost trivial, after the depth of the conversation we just had. When we reached my office door, Julia paused. Thank you again, Sarah, for everything. I'll start putting some thoughts together on next steps, and perhaps we can meet again next week, more formally, to begin some actual planning. That sounds good, Julia. I'll be ready. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. Good. And then she did something completely unexpected. She reached out and briefly, gently, squeezed my arm. It was a small gesture, but in the context of our previous relationship, it was monumental. A gesture of trust, of gratitude, of a new, unspoken bond. Then she turned and walked towards her own office, her posture a little straighter, I thought, her steps a little lighter. I watched her go, then stepped into my own office, my mind reeling, my heart full. The spreadsheet I'd been wrestling with earlier lay forgotten on my desk. It seemed so insignificant now. My world had just tilted on its axis, and somehow it felt more aligned than ever before. I sat down, not to work, but just to process, to let the reality of what had just happened sink in. My boss, James Harrison, was Julia, and she had trusted me with her truth. The afternoon, which had started with such ordinary trepidation, had unfolded into something truly extraordinary. It was the beginning of something new, something challenging, but ultimately something deeply, profoundly human. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was privileged to be a part of it. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, for her or for those around her, but the courage she had shown today was a beacon, and I was more than willing to help navigate by its light. This was more than just an office matter. It was about a person's journey to their most authentic self, and I felt a quiet sense of purpose in being able to support her. Over the next few weeks, Julia and I began our quiet planning. We met in her office, sometimes after hours, the usual professional formality replaced by a more collaborative, almost conspiratorial atmosphere. She shared more about her personal journey, the cautious steps she was taking with hormone therapy, the small ways she was beginning to express her female identity in her private life, choosing softer fabrics, letting her hair grow a little longer, experimenting with subtle makeup when she was at home. She spoke of the joy and the terror of it, the liberation mixed with a profound fear of rejection. I listened, offered practical advice where I could, and mostly just provided a safe space for her to voice her thoughts and fears. My role evolved from executive assistant to something more akin to a strategist and confidant. We researched corporate policies on gender transition, looking at best practices from other companies. We started drafting communication plans for different stakeholders, the board of directors, senior management, all employees, and key clients. Each one required a different approach, a different level of detail, a different sensitivity. The board will be the first major hurdle, Julia said one evening, staring out of her office window at the city lights twinkling below. They're mostly older, quite traditional. Some of them have known me as James for decades. We'll need to frame it carefully, I replied, making notes on my pad. Focus on continuity of leadership, your continued commitment to the company, and the fact that this is a personal journey that will ultimately allow you to be a more effective, authentic leader. I also suggested bringing in an expert on diversity and inclusion to speak to the board beforehand, to lay some groundwork. Julia liked that idea. It's not just about me, is it? She mused. It's about creating a company culture where everyone can be their authentic self. Perhaps this challenge can be a catalyst for positive change throughout Harrison & Co. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late one afternoon, after a particularly grueling day dealing with a difficult client who had been unusually demanding of Mr. Harrison, Julia looked utterly deflated. "Sarah, am I completely mad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Am I about to destroy everything I've worked my entire life to build? My reputation, this company?" I pulled up a chair opposite her desk. "Julia," I said firmly but gently, "what you are doing takes incredible courage." "It's not madness. It's honesty. This company is strong because of your leadership, your vision. That won't change because you are finally living as your true self. Yes, there will be challenges. Some people may not understand or may react poorly. But Harrison & Co. is more than just a name. It's the people who work here, the values we uphold. And integrity, authenticity, those are powerful values." She looked at me, a flicker of her earlier determination returning to her eyes. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," I said, and I meant it. And I believe others will too, in time. We also discussed the more personal aspects. How she would begin to present as Julia more publicly. Wardrobe was a significant topic. "I haven't bought women's clothes since, well, ever not for myself to wear out in the world," she confessed, a touch of nervousness in her voice. "The idea of walking into a department store is terrifying." "Then we'll start small," I suggested. "Online shopping, perhaps. Or maybe there's a personal shopper service that could help, someone discreet and understanding." I even offered to go with her, if she liked, though I sensed that was a step she needed to take on her own, or with someone from her personal life. She smiled. "You think of everything, Sarah." "It's my job to anticipate needs," I reminded her gently. The 6 months she had initially estimated began to feel very real. She started subtly changing her appearance at work. Her suits became a little less severely tailored, a little softer in cut. She wore scarves, sometimes in richer colors. Her hair, once always neatly short, was now styled in a slightly longer, softer way. These were small changes, almost imperceptible on their own, but collectively they signaled a shift. I noticed a few colleagues giving her curious glances, but no one said anything. The respect for Mr. Harrison, the CEO, was too ingrained. One of the most significant steps was telling her children. She had 2, a son and a daughter, both in their late 20s with families of their own. She agonized over it for weeks. What if they can't accept it? What if they don't want me in their lives or their children's lives as Julia? "They love you, Julia," I tried to reassure her, though I knew this was a deeply personal and unpredictable part of her journey. They love their parent. This doesn't change that fundamental bond. The weekend she chose to tell them, I found myself unusually anxious. I sent her a brief text on Saturday morning. "Thinking of you. Hope it goes well." She replied late on Sunday evening. It was. A lot. Shock, tears, confusion, but also love. Questions, so many questions. But they're trying. They're really trying. It's a start. A fragile start, but a start. I felt a wave of relief for her. It was, as she said, a start, and that was all anyone could ask for. The planning for the corporate announcement intensified. We decided on a phased approach. First, the board of directors in a specially convened meeting. Then, senior management, followed by an all-staff meeting, and finally, carefully worded communications to key clients and stakeholders. Julia decided she wanted to be present for all of it, to tell her story in her own words, as much as possible. The day she was scheduled to meet with the board was fraught with tension. She came into the office looking pale but resolute. She was wearing a charcoal gray trouser suit, impeccably tailored, but with a softer blouse underneath than she might have chosen previously. Her demeanor was calm, but I could see the strain in her eyes. "Ready?" I asked quietly, as she prepared to head to the boardroom. She took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be, Sarah. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck, Julia," I said. "You have truth on your side. And you have me, right here, if you need anything at all. I'd be waiting just outside the boardroom, ready to provide any documents, any support." She gave me a grateful look, a small nod, and then she walked towards the biggest professional challenge of her life. I watched her go, admiring her courage more than words could say. The fate of Harrison & Co., and more importantly, Julia's future as its leader, hung in the balance. The next few hours would be critical. I settled into a chair outside the boardroom, my own heart pounding, sending every ounce of positive energy I possessed her way. This was her moment, her crucible. And I could only hope that the men and women inside that room would see the strength, the integrity, and the humanity that I had come to see in Julia Harrison. The wait felt interminable. Every muffled sound from within the boardroom sent my nerves jangling. I tried to focus on some paperwork, but it was impossible. My thoughts were entirely with Julia, imagining the scene inside, the questions, the reactions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2 hours, the boardroom door opened. Board members began to file out. Their expressions varied. Some looked serious, thoughtful. Others were harder to read. I scanned their faces, searching for a clue, any indication of how it had gone. There was no immediate consensus visible. My anxiety ratcheted up another notch. Then Julia emerged. She looked tired, emotionally drained, but there was a faint smile playing on her lips. She caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, flooded through me. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it seemed the first, and arguably most formidable, hurdle had been navigated without immediate disaster. She walked over to me, her steps slow but steady. "Well," she said, her voice a little hoarse, "that was intense." "How did it go?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice even. "Better than I feared, Sarah. Much better." There were a lot of questions, of course. Concerns about client reactions, about media, about the stability of the company. She made air quotes around stability. But overall, I think they'd listened. I think they understood on some level. Or at least they're willing to try. No one stormed out. No one called for my immediate resignation. She gave a wry smile. So small victories. "That's more than a small victory, Julia," I said, feeling a genuine warmth spread through me. "That's a significant step forward. There are conditions, of course," she continued, as we began to walk slowly back towards her office. "They want a detailed plan for managing external communications. They want reassurances about the impact on business. They want to be kept informed every step of the way. All reasonable, I suppose, under the circumstances." "We can do all of that," I said confidently. "We've already started." Once back in the sanctuary of her office, she sank into her chair, letting out a long, deep breath. "Thank you, Sarah. Knowing you were out there, it helped. More than you know." "I was glad to be there," I replied. "So, what's the next immediate step with them?" "They want to meet again in a week, with our proposed communications and transition timeline fully fleshed out. They also suggested, or rather strongly recommended, that I consider taking a short leave of absence during the initial public announcement period to let things settle." It was a delicate question. "I can see their perspective," I said slowly. "It might reduce some of the initial intensity for you, but it could also be misinterpreted as a lack of confidence or as you being sidelined. We need to weigh those risks carefully. If you do take leave, the messaging around it would have to be impeccable." "My thoughts exactly," she said. "Let's work on that messaging. Perhaps frame it as a pre-planned period for personal development and strategic planning, aligning with my introduction to the company." Over the following week, we worked tirelessly. We refined the communication strategy, drafted internal memos, prepared FAQs, and developed a detailed timeline for Julia's transition within the company. We also discussed the leave of absence idea further. Julia ultimately decided against a formal leave, but agreed to a period of working more flexibly, perhaps some days remotely, immediately following the main announcements, allowing space for adjustment while still being present and leading. The meeting with senior management was next. This group was more diverse in age and background than the board, and many of them had worked closely with James for years, respecting his leadership. Julia decided to be very direct with them, sharing her personal story with an honesty that was both disarming and compelling. The reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, even emotional. Several department heads openly expressed their admiration for her courage and pledged their full backing. There were tears, hugs, things I'd never witnessed in our corporate environment. It was a testament to the respect Julia had earned over the years and to the fundamental decency of her team. The all-staff meeting was the largest and most unpredictable audience. Harrison & Co. employed over 500 people in our main office. We booked the large auditorium. Julia was visibly nervous beforehand, but as she stood on the stage, a hush fell over the room. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and steady. She told her truth simply, eloquently. She spoke of her identity, her journey, and her commitment to the company and its people. She introduced herself as Julia. The silence that followed her speech was profound. For a moment, I held my breath. Then someone at the front started to clap. Slowly, then more quickly, the applause spread, growing into a standing ovation. It was a powerful, emotional moment. I saw Julia's shoulders relax, a watery smile grace her lips as she looked out at the sea of faces. Not everyone was applauding, of course. I saw some confused expressions, some whispers. But the overwhelming majority were showing their support. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind. There were articles in the business press, some sensationalist, others surprisingly respectful. We handled media inquiries carefully, sticking to our prepared statements, emphasizing Julia's continued leadership and the company's support. Internally, there were adjustments. New email addresses, updated personnel files. People began to use Julia, and she/her pronouns. There were stumbles, occasional slip-ups with names or pronouns, but generally there was a genuine effort to be respectful. Julia, for her part, handled it all with grace and patience. She was more visible than ever, walking the floors, talking to employees, answering questions. She started dressing in a way that was clearly more comfortable and authentic for her: stylish dresses, smart trouser suits in softer lines, elegant blouses. Her whole demeanor seemed to change. There was a lightness about her, a new confidence that wasn't there before. The formidable CEO was still present, but now infused with a warmth and openness that was incredibly engaging. There were, inevitably, some negative reactions. A few clients expressed concerns. A couple of long-standing employees, older and more rigid in their views, quietly took early retirement. These were painful moments for Julia, I knew, but she faced them with the same quiet determination she'd shown all along. "We can't win everyone over, Sarah," she said to me one afternoon. "But as long as we act with integrity, and as long as the business remains strong, the critics will have less and less to say." And the business did remain strong. In fact, in some ways, it improved. The publicity, though initially challenging, also raised Harrison & Co.'s profile. We were seen as a progressive, inclusive company. It attracted new talent, younger people who were drawn to our values. Julia, as a visible transgender CEO, became an unintentional role model for many. My own role continued to evolve. I was no longer just an executive assistant. I was a key advisor, a sounding board, a trusted partner in navigating this new landscape. Our relationship, once strictly professional, had deepened into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. We still had coffee sometimes, not in a clandestine way to share secrets, but as two colleagues, two friends, discussing work, life, and the ongoing journey of Harrison & Co., under the leadership of Julia Harrison. Looking back on that Tuesday afternoon at the Daily Grind, I'm still amazed at how one unexpected conversation could change so much. It changed Mr. Harrison into Julia. It changed my job description in ways I could never have imagined. But most importantly, it changed the culture of our company for the better, fostering a new level of honesty and acceptance. Julia's secret, once revealed, didn't lead to the disaster she might have feared. Instead, it became a catalyst for growth, for understanding, and for a more authentic way of doing business. And I was, and remain, incredibly proud to have played a small part in her incredible journey, a journey that proved that courage and authenticity are among the greatest assets any leader and any human being can possess. It taught me that sometimes the most unexpected revelations can lead to the most profound and positive transformations, not just for one person, but for everyone around them. The world didn't end. A new one, in many ways a better one, began.